I hadn't even left the cemetery when my phone started ringing. The dirt on my mother's grave was still dark and fresh, and my hands were shaking from holding back tears that never seemed to end. I was still wearing the same black dress, still hearing the echo of the final prayer, when an unfamiliar number flashed across my screen. I almost ignored it, because who calls someone 1 hour after their mother's funeral? But something in my chest tightened, and I answered. "Miss Collins," a calm male voice said, careful and controlled. "This is Daniel Reynolds. I was your mother's lawyer. You need to come to my office right now." I asked him why. There was a pause long enough to scare me. "I can't explain over the phone," he replied quietly. "But what your mother left behind changes everything you believe about your family." I thought it was about paperwork, a will, a house. I had no idea I was walking straight into a truth that would break my heart and rewrite my entire life. My name is Harper Collins, and for most of my life, I believed my family was ordinary. Not perfect, but normal. We argued. We drifted apart. We came back together when it mattered. At least, that's what I told myself. My mother's funeral took place on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of day that felt muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The sky hung low over the cemetery, heavy with clouds that never quite decided whether to rain. The air smelled like damp soil and fresh flowers, a scent I knew would haunt me long after that day. I stood near the front, hands clasped so tightly they ached, staring at the polished wood of the casket. My mother, Margaret Collins, had been gentle in life, quiet. She was the kind of woman who lowered her voice instead of raising it, who apologized even when she had done nothing wrong. Seeing her name carved into stone felt unreal, like a typo the universe had refused to correct. People came up to me one by one. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Harper. She was such a kind woman. Your mom helped me through a really hard time." I nodded. I thanked them. I smiled when I was supposed to. I cried when I couldn't stop myself. And then there was Ethan. My older brother stood several steps away from everyone else, near an old oak tree at the edge of the cemetery. His black suit was perfectly pressed. His hair was neat. He looked composed in a way that felt almost offensive. While others wiped tears from their faces, Ethan checked his phone, scrolling with his thumb as if he were killing time in line somewhere. At first, I tried not to judge him. People grieve differently, I reminded myself. Not everyone cries in public. But grief, even quiet grief, has weight. Ethan looked empty, detached. When the pastor began speaking about my mother's kindness, about her patience and generosity, I felt my throat tighten. He talked about how she always put others first, how she never wanted to be a burden. I felt tears spill down my cheeks, my vision blurring. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan shift his stance and sigh. Actually, sigh. When the casket was lowered into the ground, a soft collective sob rippled through the crowd. Someone behind me whispered a prayer. Someone else broke down completely. I reached for Ethan's hand without looking, instinctively, the way I had when we were kids. He didn't take it. Instead, he glanced at his watch. That was when something cold settled in my stomach. After the service, people lingered in small clusters, reluctant to leave. I stood there answering questions, accepting hugs, listening to stories about my mother I'd never heard before. Each one made the loss feel sharper. Ethan approached me only when most of the guests had started to drift away. "You okay?" he asked, his voice flat. I looked up at him, searching his face for something: sadness, guilt, anything. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't think it's hit me yet." He nodded, distracted, eyes already moving past me toward the parking lot. "Yeah," he said. "It's been a long morning." That was it. No mention of Mom, no shared memory, no acknowledgement of the fact that we had just buried the woman who raised us. I stepped forward and hugged him anyway, because that's what siblings are supposed to do in moments like this. His body stayed rigid, his arms barely closing around me. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice shaking. "She's really gone." He pulled back almost immediately. "Harper, don't start," he said quietly, glancing around as if embarrassed. "We'll deal with everything later." Everything. The word echoed in my head. "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated for half a second, then forced a small, tight smile. "I just mean arrangements, paperwork, you know, practical stuff." I stared at him, suddenly exhausted. My chest hurt not just from grief, but from confusion. This wasn't how I remembered my brother. Or maybe it was, and I had simply ignored it for too long. As Ethan walked away toward his car, I stayed where I was, staring at my mother's grave. The wind picked up, rustling the flowers laid on the fresh mound of earth. I had the strangest thought then, one I immediately tried to push away. It feels like he's already moved on. I didn't know yet that this wasn't indifference. It was urgency. And whatever Ethan was trying to get past as quickly as possible had everything to do with the phone call I would receive less than an hour later. I was still standing there, staring at my mother's grave, when my phone vibrated again in my hand. At first, I didn't notice it. My mind was foggy, my thoughts moving slowly, like they were wading through water. The cemetery had begun to empty. The sound of car doors closing echoed faintly in the distance, and the wind carried away the last murmurs of condolences. Then the phone buzzed a second time. I glanced down, irritated, expecting another message from a distant relative or a missed call notification. Instead, I saw an unfamiliar number. No name, no location. For a moment, I considered letting it ring. Not now, I thought. Not today. But something inside me tightened, the same strange feeling I'd had moments earlier when Ethan checked his watch beside my mother's casket. A quiet pressure in my chest, as if my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. I answered. Hello? My voice sounded thin, even to my own ears. Miss Collins? The man on the other end spoke calmly, but there was an edge to his tone, like someone choosing his words very carefully. My name is Daniel Reynolds. I was your mother's attorney. I straightened immediately. My mother's attorney? Yes, he said. I'm sorry for your loss. I know this is an awful time. Something about the way he said it told me he wasn't calling just to offer condolences. I need you to come to my office, he continued. As soon as possible. I frowned, my fingers tightening around the phone. Is this about her will? There was a pause, not a technical pause, not a dropped signal, a deliberate one. I can't discuss the details over the phone, Daniel said slowly. But what your mother left behind is sensitive and important. My heart began to beat faster. Important how? Another pause. Longer this time. Harper, he said gently. What I'm about to show you may be difficult to hear. I strongly recommend you come alone. Alone. That single word sent a chill down my spine. I instinctively looked toward the parking lot, where Ethan was just getting into his car. Why alone? I asked. It's in your best interest, Daniel replied. And your mother specifically requested it. The world seemed to tilt slightly. My mother? I whispered. She asked for this? Yes. I swallowed hard. Okay, I'll come. Good, he said. I'll be waiting. The call ended. I lowered the phone slowly, my hand trembling now. Around me, the cemetery had grown quiet. Most of the cars were gone. Only a few wilted flower arrangements remained, bending under the weight of the wind. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the dark soil covering my mother's coffin. Sensitive. Come alone. Your mother requested it. None of that sounded like routine paperwork. As I walked toward my car, my thoughts raced. Maybe Mom had changed her will at the last minute. Maybe there was something unresolved, an old account, a forgotten property. Something practical, something explainable. But the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. Halfway across the lot, I heard my name, Harper. I turned to see Ethan standing beside his car, keys in hand. Where are you going? He asked casually. I hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. I need to stop by somewhere, I said. His eyes narrowed slightly. Where? I forced a shrug. Just an errand. Ethan studied me in silence. His gaze felt heavier than it should have, as if he were weighing something in his mind. You sure you don't want me to come with you? He asked. The words were polite. The tone wasn't. No, I said quickly. Too quickly. I'll be fine. Something unreadable flickered across his face, surprise, maybe. Or irritation. It was gone before I could be sure. All right, he said. Call me later. I nodded and got into my car, my hands shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled out of the cemetery, I checked the rearview mirror. Ethan was still standing there, watching me leave. The drive downtown felt unreal. Traffic lights blurred past. The radio played softly, some cheerful song that felt wildly inappropriate. I turned it off. My mother had always hated conflict. She avoided arguments, smoothed things over, kept the peace at her own expense. Whatever she had gone to Daniel Reynolds for, it must have taken real fear to push her that far. By the time I parked outside the lawyer's building, my heart was pounding. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the glass doors ahead of me. I had walked into that day thinking I was just burying my mother. I had no idea I was about to uncover the truth she had spent years hiding, and the reason she had been afraid in the first place. Daniel Reynolds' office was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, almost protective. Thick glass walls shut out the noise of the city, and the door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded final. He didn't invite me to sit right away. Instead, he walked to the window, pulled the blinds halfway down, and only then turned back to me. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to be very clear. Nothing I'm about to show you is speculation. Every document here is verified." Said. That alone made my stomach twist. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap the way my mother used to when she was nervous. Daniel slid a thin folder toward me. Not thick, not dramatic. Just a neat stack of papers, carefully organized. "This," he said, "is why your mother came to see me." I opened the folder. Emails, bank summaries, notes written in my mother's handwriting, dated over several years. I recognized her cursive, instantly rounded letters, slightly slanted to the right, careful, almost apologetic. I looked up at him. "I don't understand," Daniel exhaled. "Your mother believed she was being controlled." The word felt too strong. Controlled how? Financially, emotionally, gradually. He spoke slowly, as if he didn't want to overwhelm me, but each sentence landed like a quiet blow. "For the last 6 years," he continued, "your brother, Ethan, had access to nearly all of your mother's accounts. He handled payments, investments, insurance. At first, it was presented as help. Help. I thought of how often Mom had said, 'Ethan takes care of that,' how she waved off my questions, how she laughed lightly and said, 'You know me, I'm terrible with numbers.'" Daniel pointed to a series of highlighted lines. "Your mother started noticing small things, withdrawals she didn't recognize, transfers she hadn't approved. When she asked about them, she was told not to worry." My chest tightened. "She wrote," Daniel said, tapping one page. "I don't want to upset him. He gets frustrated when I ask questions." I swallowed hard. That sounded exactly like her. "She also noted," he continued, "he says I wouldn't manage without him. Maybe he's right." I felt something crack inside me. My mother wasn't naive. She wasn't incapable. She had raised 2 children on her own for years after my parents divorced. But she hated conflict. She hated being seen as difficult. Daniel leaned forward. "Harper, control doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like constant correction. Reassurance mixed with doubt. Help that slowly becomes dependence." Images flooded my mind. Mom hesitating before speaking. Lowering her voice when Ethan entered a room. Ending phone calls quickly when he walked by. "How long did she live like this?" I asked quietly. "Longer than she admitted to herself," Daniel replied. He handed me another document. A dated journal entry. "I feel smaller every year," my mother had written. "I used to trust my instincts. Now I second-guess everything." My vision blurred. "She didn't tell me," I whispered. "She never told me any of this," Daniel nodded. "She was afraid you'd confront him. She was afraid it would make things worse." That sounded painfully familiar. My mother always chose peace, even when peace cost her dignity. "She came to me," Daniel went on, "because she felt she was losing her autonomy. She told me she felt watched, judged, that she had to ask permission for her own money." I pressed my lips together, anger rising beneath the grief. "Did he threaten her?" I asked. Daniel shook his head carefully. Not directly, but she described constant pressure, guilt, statements like, "After everything I've done for you," or "You'd be lost without me." My hands clenched. I remembered Ethan's voice at the funeral. "Let's deal with everything later." So calm, so certain. "When did she decide to act?" I asked. Daniel's expression softened. "After a doctor's appointment. She realized she might not have as much time as she thought. She told me she didn't want to leave you a mess or leave herself unprotected. He slid one final sheet toward me. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Private consultation, confidential." And beneath it, in my mother's handwriting, "If I stay silent, nothing will change. If I speak, at least one of my children will be safe." Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. All those years, I had thought my mother was simply tired, fragile, slowing down. She hadn't been weak. She had been enduring something quietly, alone, hoping it wouldn't explode. Daniel watched me carefully. "Harper, what your mother did next was intentional, strategic, legal." I looked up at him, my heart pounding. "What did she do?" I asked. He paused. "She made a decision that would protect you and directly challenge your brother." And in that moment, I realized the phone call wasn't just about my mother's past. It was about a conflict that had already begun, whether I was ready for it or not. Daniel didn't speak right away. Instead, he stood up, walked to a tall metal filing cabinet behind his desk, and unlocked it with a small silver key. The sound of the lock clicking open felt louder than it should have, echoing in the quiet office. "What I'm about to show you," he said without turning around, "is the reason your mother insisted on absolute confidentiality." My heart pounded. I could hear it in my ears. He returned to the desk holding two folders. One was blue, the other was brown, edges worn as if it had been handled many times. He placed them side by side in front of me. "There are two wills," Daniel said. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Two?" "Yes." My mouth felt dry. "That's not possible, is it?" "It's unusual," he replied calmly, "but it's legal, and in this case, intentional." He tapped the blue folder first. "This is the will that has already been submitted for probate." I opened it with trembling fingers. It was simple, clean, almost clinical. Ethan Collins was listed as the primary beneficiary. He inherited the house, the savings, the investment accounts. My name appeared only once, attached to a modest personal item, my mother's jewelry. My chest tightened. "This is what Ethan believes is the only will," Daniel said carefully. "Believes." I looked up at him. "Believes?" Daniel slid the brown folder closer to me. "Because this is the one your mother never wanted him to find." I hesitated before opening it, a deep sense of dread settling in my stomach. Something told me that once I read what was inside, there would be no going back. The document was longer, more detailed. Every page stamped, witnessed, notarized. Legal, precise, and devastating. Instead of leaving assets directly to either of her children, my mother had placed the majority of her estate into a protective trust. The trustee's name was printed clearly near the top, Harper Collins. I sucked in a sharp breath. "I don't understand," I whispered. Why me?" Daniel's voice softened. "Because you were the one she trusted not to misuse it." I kept reading. The trust, limited access to funds, required independent oversight, blocked unilateral withdrawals. And most importantly, it removed Ethan's control. My hands shook as I turned the page. Attached to the will was a handwritten letter. Daniel nodded. "She asked that you read that now." I unfolded the paper carefully. "Harper, if you're reading this, it means I finally did what I was afraid to do for years. I love your brother. I always will. But love should never feel like fear." Tears welled in my eyes. I stayed quiet because I thought keeping the peace was protecting my family. I see now that my silence only made things worse. I pressed my lips together, forcing myself to continue. "I chose you not because you are stronger, but because you are fair. You listen. You don't need control to feel secure." Daniel cleared his throat gently, giving me space. I read the final lines twice. "This trust is not punishment. It is protection. For you. And for me." My hands dropped into my lap. "So Ethan," my voice cracked, "he doesn't know about this." "No," Daniel said. "And given the circumstances, I strongly advise that he does not find out from you." I looked at him sharply. "Why?" "Because," he said carefully, "the moment this will is presented, it triggers a legal dispute. And based on your mother's records, that dispute may become hostile." The word sent a chill through me. Hostile. "He's already filed the other will," I said slowly. "Yes," Daniel replied, "which tells me he was in a hurry." My mind raced back to the funeral. Ethan checking his watch. His impatience. Let's deal with everything later. No. He hadn't wanted to deal with it later. He wanted to deal with it fast before anything else surfaced. Harper, Daniel said, leaning forward. Your mother anticipated this. That's why she structured the trust the way she did. The law is very clear here. But he'll fight it, I said. Yes, Daniel agreed. He almost certainly will. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about exposing something my brother had spent years keeping quiet. I stood up slowly, the room spinning slightly. My mother planned all of this, I said, more to myself than to Daniel. Yes, he replied. And she did it knowing it might cost her peace in the short term. I closed my eyes. All those nights she said she was tired. All those moments she brushed off my concern. She hadn't been passive. She had been preparing. Daniel's voice cut gently through my thoughts. Harper, I need to ask you something. I opened my eyes. Are you prepared, he said, to stand by your mother's decision even if it puts you directly in conflict with your brother? The question hung in the air. I thought of Ethan's tone at the cemetery. His warning smile, the way he'd watched me leave. I took a slow breath. I don't know if I'm prepared, I said honestly. Then I looked down at my mother's handwriting, steady and deliberate. But I know I can't undo what she trusted me to do. Daniel nodded once. Then, he said quietly, this is where things truly begin. Ethan didn't wait long. That night, barely 3 hours after I left Daniel Reynolds' office, there was a knock on my apartment door. Not a polite knock. Not hesitant. 3 sharp strikes. Controlled, certain. I knew it was him before I even reached the door. I took a breath, steadying myself the way Daniel had advised. Stay calm. Say as little as possible. When I opened the door, Ethan stood there with a familiar smile stretched too tightly across his face. Hey Harper, he said lightly. You didn't answer my calls. I was busy, I replied. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, glancing around my apartment as if he were cataloging it. The silence between us felt thick, heavy with words neither of us wanted to say first. So, he began casually, loosening his tie. Daniel Reynolds. Interesting guy. My stomach clenched. You spoke to him, I said. Ethan chuckled. Of course I did. He called me earlier. Said he'd seen you. I turned to face him. And? And he wouldn't tell me what you talked about, Ethan replied, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Which is strange, considering I'm handling Mom's estate. There it was. The assumption. The ownership. I don't think that's accurate anymore, I said quietly. The room went still. Ethan's smile didn't fade right away. Instead, it froze, like a photograph held too long in the sun. What do you mean? He asked. I folded my arms, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Mom made other arrangements. His eyes sharpened. What kind of arrangements? Legal ones. For a split second, something dark flashed across his face. Then he laughed. Harper, he said gently, as if explaining something to a child. Mom was confused near the end. Doctors even mentioned cognitive decline. You know that. I stared at him. No, I said. I know she was afraid. That wiped the smile off his face completely. Afraid of what? He snapped. You. The word hung between us like a crack of thunder. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation, I replied. One, she documented. Over years. He took a step closer. You're letting a lawyer put ideas in your head. I'm listening to my mother, I said. Silence. Then Ethan exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together the way he used to when he was trying to stay calm. Look, he said, lowering his voice. We've both had a long day. Grief messes with people. Let's not turn this into something ugly. Ugly. The word felt like a warning. I'm not turning it into anything, I replied. I'm following her wishes. And her wishes, he said sharply, were to keep this family together. That's what you wanted, I shot back. Not what she wanted. His eyes hardened. You have no idea what I sacrificed for her, he said. I handled everything. Bills, appointments, stress you never had to deal with. I felt anger rise in my chest. You didn't sacrifice, you controlled. He scoffed. She needed help. She needed respect. Ethan's voice dropped. Careful, Harper. There it was. Not shouted. Not violent. But unmistakable. Careful of what? I asked. Of pushing this too far, he replied. Things get complicated when lawyers start digging. My hands trembled, but I didn't step back. You don't get to scare me anymore. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed softly. You think this trust nonsense will hold up? I already filed the will. The court will side with me. Daniel disagrees, I said. Ethan's nostrils flared. Daniel works for whoever pays him. He worked for Mom, I said, and she planned for this. For the first time, his confidence cracked. You're really going to do this, he said slowly. You're choosing paperwork over your own brother. I shook my head. She didn't choose me over you, she chose safety. His voice rose. You think you're some kind of hero now? No, I replied, my voice breaking. I think I'm finally listening. Ethan turned away, pacing the room, his agitation growing. You always thought you were better than me, he muttered. The responsible one, the smart one. That's not true. Yes, it is, he snapped, spinning back toward me. And now you want to take everything. I don't want anything, I said. I want what she asked for. He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was barely above a whisper. You have no idea how exposed you're making yourself. I met his gaze, my fear slowly giving way to something steadier. And you have no idea how much damage silence causes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan straightened, smoothing his jacket, forcing that smile back onto his face. Fine, he said coolly. Do it your way. We'll see how long that lasts. He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. Oh, Harper? He added without turning around. Don't expect this to end quietly. The door closed behind him. I sank onto the couch, my legs weak, my chest aching. For the first time since my mother's funeral, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just about a will, or money, or control. This was about standing between my mother's truth and the person who had benefited from her silence. And whether I liked it or not, the conflict she had spent years avoiding had now landed squarely in my hands. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside my apartment made my heart jump, the elevator doors closing, footsteps in the hallway, even the hum of my refrigerator. Ethan's words kept replaying in my head, not as shouting, not as threats, but as something worse. Certainty. Don't expect this to end quietly. By morning, the fear had settled into something heavier but clearer. Resolve. I called Daniel Reynolds before 8. I'm ready, I said the moment he answered. Whatever comes next. I'll need 67 to tain. He ate her sort of provision. There was a pause on the line, then a calm exhale. All right, Harper. Then we move forward. By noon, everything changed. Daniel filed an emergency motion with the probate court, formally submitting my mother's protective trust and requesting an immediate injunction. The language was clinical, almost cold, but I understood what it meant. Ethan could no longer access the accounts. No transfers. No withdrawals. No unilateral decisions. For the first time in years, my mother's finances were locked down, protected. That afternoon, I sat in a small conference room at Daniel's office while a court-appointed advocate reviewed the case. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm voice, someone who looked like she had seen too much to be easily shaken. This is not an inheritance dispute, she said plainly. This is a case of undue influence and financial exploitation. Hearing those words out loud sent a chill through me. Exploitation. It was a word I associated with strangers, with headlines not my own family. She explained how cases like my mother's often unfolded quietly. No shouting, no bruises, just erosion, gradual isolation, constant doubt. Dependence disguised as care. She didn't lose control all at once, the advocate said. It was taken from her in pieces. I nodded, my throat tight. Ethan was notified that evening. He called me 3 times. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as emails began flooding in, formal notices, legal acknowledgments, scheduling updates. Everything moved faster than I expected, like a machine that had finally been switched on. 2 days later, we sat in a courtroom. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, just wood benches, fluorescent lights, and a judge who listened carefully while Daniel laid out the facts. My mother's journals. The financial discrepancies. The pattern of control. Ethan's lawyer argued calmly, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. That my mother had been confused. That Ethan had only tried to help. I watched my brother from across the room. He didn't look angry. He looked offended. As if the real injustice wasn't what my mother had endured, but that anyone had dared to question him. When the judge spoke, her voice was steady. "This court finds sufficient evidence to uphold the protective trust and maintain the injunction," she said. "An independent review will proceed." Just like that, the balance shifted. Ethan wasn't in control anymore. Outside the courtroom, he finally confronted me. "This is insane," he hissed under his breath. "You're turning Mom into a victim." "She was a victim," I replied quietly. He stared at me, disbelief etched across his face. "You really think the court knows her better than I did?" "I think the court listened to her," I said. That was when his anger finally surfaced, not loud, not explosive, but sharp. "You're ruining this family," he said. I shook my head. "I'm telling the truth." He turned away without another word. Over the next few weeks, the investigation deepened. An external auditor reviewed years of transactions. Emails were flagged. Patterns emerged that couldn't be explained away as mistakes. Each update was another confirmation of what my mother had lived with in silence. Daniel kept reminding me, "This process exists for a reason. You're not doing anything wrong." I wanted to believe him. Some nights, the guilt crept in anyway. This was my brother. The person I'd shared childhood memories with. The one who taught me how to ride a bike. But then I remembered my mother's handwriting, her careful words, her fear, and the guilt shifted. One evening, Daniel called with a quiet but significant update. "The court has approved a long-term oversight plan," he said. "Your mother's assets will be managed transparently. No one person will have unchecked power again." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. She was finally safe, even after death. Ethan stopped calling after that. The silence between us stretched heavy, unresolved. But for the first time since her funeral, the silence didn't feel dangerous. It felt contained. And as the legal process continued, I began to understand something my mother had learned too late. Love without boundaries can become a weapon, and the law, when it works, isn't cruel. It is protection. The final hearing took place on a cold Monday morning. I remember that clearly because I almost didn't go. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror for a long time, staring at my reflection, trying to recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked older than she had a month ago. Not in years, but in weight. In the way her shoulders sat slightly lower, in the way her eyes no longer searched for approval. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. This was the end of something I had been holding on to my entire life. The idea that my family could still be repaired. The courtroom was fuller this time. Not with spectators or reporters, but with people who had been quietly involved from the beginning. Auditors, legal representatives, the court-appointed advocate, and Ethan's attorney sitting stiffly beside him. Ethan didn't look at me when I entered. He sat straight, hands folded, jaw tight. He looked confident in the way people do when they believe they're still entitled to an outcome, even when the ground beneath them has already cracked. Daniel gave me a small nod as I sat behind him. The judge entered, and the room rose. "This court is prepared to rule," she said. My heart began to pound so hard I thought I might be sick. The judge summarized the findings carefully, methodically. Years of financial records, consistent patterns, clear evidence of undue influence. She spoke without drama, without judgment in her tone, but every word felt heavy. "This case is not about intent alone," she said. "It is about impact." I held my breath. The court finds that Margaret Collins was subjected to sustained financial and emotional pressure that compromised her autonomy. I felt tears sting my eyes. My mother's experience finally spoken aloud. Not minimized. Not softened. Recognized. The judge continued. "The protective trust is hereby upheld in full. The prior will submitted by Ethan Collins is invalidated due to undue influence." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" he said sharply, before his lawyer touched his arm. The judge didn't react. "Additionally," she went on, "this court orders continued oversight of the trust and prohibits Ethan Collins from exercising any control over these assets now or in the future." Outmanaged, it wasn't the market my had. and being consumed as of difference persistim. Just like that. It was over. I felt a strange emptiness settle in my chest. Not relief. Not victory. Finality. Ethan stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice echoing in the room. "She needed help. Everyone knows that." The judge fixed him with a steady gaze. "This court has heard enough, Mr. Collins," she said. "This hearing is concluded." The gavel came down, and with that sound, something inside me fractured completely and then, slowly, began to let go. Outside the courtroom, Ethan finally turned to face me. "This is what you wanted," he said bitterly. "You took everything." I shook my head, exhaustion washing over me. "I took nothing. I protected what she asked me to." "You humiliated me," he snapped. "You isolated her," I replied quietly. For a moment we just stared at each other. Brother and sister. Strangers now. "You could have talked to me," he said, his voice tight. "I tried," I said. "She tried." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You always think you're right." I didn't answer. Because for the first time, being right didn't matter. He stepped back, shaking his head. "You'll regret this." I watched him walk away down the courthouse steps, his shoulders rigid, his back straight, his pride intact even as everything else collapsed around him. And that's when I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Ethan didn't feel guilt. He felt loss of control. The legal process moved quickly after that. Notices were issued. Accounts were formally restructured. The trust entered its long-term oversight phase, and Ethan disappeared from my life. No calls, no messages, no attempts at reconciliation. Friends asked me if I was relieved. I never knew how to answer. Relief implies release. What I felt was mourning, not just for my mother but for the family I thought I had. That night I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering outside my window. The silence felt heavier than it ever had before, but it was different now. It wasn't threatening. It was honest. I took out the letter my mother had written, the one Daniel had given me weeks earlier, and read it again. "Protection is not cruelty," she had written. "Sometimes it is the only form of love left." For the first time, I didn't cry when I reached that line. I breathed. The conflict was over. The truth was out. The law had spoken. But the cost was real. I had lost my brother not to prison, not to exile, but to the consequences of his own choices. And as painful as that was, I knew something else with absolute clarity. If I had stayed silent, I would have lost myself too. In the weeks after the final ruling, my life grew quieter in a way I wasn't prepared for. No court dates. No urgent emails. No legal language filling my inbox. Just space. At first, that space felt unbearable. Like standing in a room after all the furniture has been removed, unsure where to sit, unsure where anything belongs. I woke up some mornings expecting another call from Daniel, another update, another problem to solve, only to remember that the fight was over. The law had done its part. Now it was my turn to live with the aftermath. I spent a lot of time alone in my mother's house. For years, it had never truly been hers. Decisions were made elsewhere. Permission was implied. Control hovered quietly in every corner. Now the house felt different. Still, neutral, safe. I opened windows she had always kept closed. I rearranged the kitchen the way she once mentioned but never did. I found small notes tucked into drawers, shopping lists, reminders, half-finished thoughts, ordinary things that felt sacred now. One afternoon, I sat at her old dining table with the trust documents spread out in front of me. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My mother hadn't left me wealth in the way people usually mean it. She left me responsibility. I followed her instructions carefully. The trust funded elder legal advocacy programs, counseling services for people experiencing family exploitation, and long-term protection so that what happened to her wouldn't happen again to anyone. It felt right. Not empowering in a dramatic way, but grounding. Like finally standing on solid ground after years of walking on shifting sand. Friends eventually asked about Ethan. "Have you heard from him? Do you think you'll reconcile?" I learned to answer honestly. No. And I don't know. Some relationships don't end with shouting or slammed doors. They end quietly when trust is exhausted. I mourned that loss in private. Not because I missed the person Ethan had become, but because I missed who I thought he was, and I allowed myself to grieve that without shame. One crisp morning, I returned to the cemetery alone. The grass had grown thicker around my mother's grave. The flowers were new, placed by someone I didn't recognize. I knelt down, brushing dirt from the stone, tracing her name with my fingertips. "I heard you," I whispered. I didn't stay quiet. The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of leaves and earth. For the first time since her funeral, my chest didn't ache when I stood there. It felt settled. I finally understood something she had tried to teach me without ever saying it out loud. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the absence of fear. I left the cemetery lighter than I arrived. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. Healing isn't a clean line, it's uneven, slow, sometimes frustrating. There were days I still felt angry, days I still questioned myself, but there was no more doubt about one thing: I had done the right thing. And slowly, that certainty turned into strength. Now, when I think about what my mother truly left me, it isn't the house, it isn't the trust, it isn't even the legal victory, it's clarity. She showed me that love without boundaries can quietly become harm, that silence can protect others, but it can also destroy yourself, and that choosing truth, even when it costs you deeply, is sometimes the only way forward. If there's one thing I carry with me now, it's this: family does not excuse control. Love does not require fear. And speaking up is not betrayal, it is survival. My mother didn't get the peace she deserved while she was alive. But because she found the courage to act and because I found the courage to listen, her voice didn't disappear with her. It lives on. And so do I.